Warhammer 40k, Dark Imperium, Part 2, Crusades End, the 41st Millennium, Chapter 4, Guilliman Lives. Reboot Guilliman drew in a deep breath, then another. He lived. Blood rushed around this massive frame. Air passed in and out of his lungs 4 times the size of a baseline human's. Gusty inhalations and exhalations that moved through the power of ties. Death had come. For 10,000 years he had slept, his body preserved in stasis upon his home world of Macragge, until a century ago when Archmazo Belisarius Cawl, aided by the alien Eldari and the saint said to be the personification of the Emperor's will, had awoken him to a galaxy tormented by war. Traitors from Horus time had emerged from the Eye of Terror, a wound in reality where the warp bled into real space. By destroying ancient alien technology, their leader, Abaddon the Despoiler, one-time lieutenant of Horus, had caused the Eye of Terror to spread across the galaxy as the Clictarium Maledictum, a great warp rift that had cut the Imperium in two. To Guilliman, the dire state of the Imperium was a horrifying surprise. He awoke from a death to find himself fighting a war he thought he had won 100 centuries before. There was no hope in this world. There was no promise. The Emperor's plans had failed completely, and suffering was the lot of all men. The galaxy was worse than ever before. Only during the long dark times of old night had humanity stood so close to the brink. It was all that remained of the old dream, the last feeble light in descending night. Since he had led, he had fought, he had bleed, but he had not slept. He could not. Even had he had the desire to. The Imperium was dying. In sleep's place, he retreated to his private quarters, to the chamber of reflection, and meditated there when he was weary. Death had disturbed his being in several ways. Sleep was one casualty. Since his resurrection, he did not feel the need to sleep often. His personal physicians could not tell him if this was a genuine physical change or psychological effect of this traumatic awakening. Both the mind and body of a Primarch were so far beyond the understanding that any medicae was next to useless. Only Archmagos Cawl, that insane polymath, might begin to comprehend how his body functioned. Whatever the cause of his sleeplessness, after 10,000 years in stasis, Reboot Guilliman thought he had slept enough. Fulgrim's poisoned blade had come close to ending him, were it not for the actions of his men hurrying him into the stasis hold. Guilliman would have died. As it was, his absence had been costly to the Imperium. So much had been lost because of his miscalculation. He had vowed never to underestimate his twisted brothers again. What happened in the aftermath of Thessaly had become a myth. Like so much of Guilliman's life history, the truth of his death has been shrouded in the impenetrable embellishment of repeat telling. He had found no... Ah, for fuck's sake! Okay. He had vowed to never underestimate his twisted brothers again. What happened in the aftermath of Thessaly had become a myth. Like so much of Guilliman's life history, the truth of his death was shrouded in the impenetrable embellishment of repeat telling. He had found no less than 26 divergent versions of the event in the Ultimate Librariums alone. What was certain was that he had been as good as dead. Most of his fleet had been destroyed, and the moons of Thessaly was a blighted wasteland to this day. He did not know that what had become of those of his sons who had fought alongside them. In most cases their name had been lost a long time ago. Aeon didn't feel, for example. Guilliman could not discern what happened to him. Back on Macragge, he had discovered the second captain's name on worn armored plaques in the chapel, buried deep under the Gothic excavations that had smothered the fortress of Hera's original form. These suggested that Thiel had survived the battle, but Guilliman did not know for how long. He did not know how he had bore the loss of his Primarch. Did he rise above it, or was his life one of torment by guilt? Guilliman did not know which apothecary had saved him, or who was in command of the chapter when the gauntlet of power broke free of Fulgrim's trap. In the archives of the Aurora chapter and the Novelmarines, there were fragmentary accounts of what had happened to their lords and captains in Thessaly, but little concerning the Ultramarines. It was certain that he had been saved, just as it was certain that his sons had paid a heavy price for his blundering into Fulgrim's web. He had woken nearly 10,000 years later to another battle in the same war. He had given a chance to put things right. He ran through those first moments of awakening again. He had come to the Temple of Correction, clad in unfamiliar armor, surrounded on all sides by his sons battling the servants of the great enemy. Wrenched from one conflict to another, 19 centuries apart, there had been a moment when he could have fallen, when his confusion threatened to leave him vulnerable to the heretic Astartes of the Black Legion. The Black Legion, even the names of the enemy were unfamiliar in these terrible times. Everything had changed, and war was everywhere. Yet war, he knew, so war was he prosecuted with greater zeal than ever before. It was a constant in a universe thrown out of through in his darkest moments. Goldman thought he could well have died and been condemned to the hell of some primitive cult. But he did not believe such things, and he did not believe he deserved such punishment. In a sense of heightened awareness, serene with his own expansive mind, Reboot Gilman took stock. Today the hammer blow would fall. The war was far from done, but after 112 years of hard campaigning, the Indomitus crusade neared its logical conclusion. He had battled to reach Terra. He had spoken with his father, and he had made his decision as to what was done. He had turned the imperium over to a state of complete and total war. New fleets had been constructed, and whole populations recruited into armed forces. Archmage's Belicarius Claw had been good to the oars he made before the Primarch's death, and he had spent the millennia of Gulliman's long sleep fashioning legions of new improved warriors, the Primaris Space Marines. From their ranks dozens of new Space Marine chapters had been founded. All across the besieged Imperium, Gulliman's crusade had fought, spinning from one crisis to another, even crossing the great rift that had split the galaxy in twain to reach the lost sectors of Imperium, Nihilis. Everywhere it went, the Indomitus crusade brought relief and reinforcements to the beleaguered worlds of mankind. More than that, the crusade brought hope in the impossible truth that the son of the Emperor strode the stars again. That phase was over. The great rift still split the sky, but the enemy had been dealt a grievous blow. Several traitor fleets had been scattered, and the demonic legions banished back to the warp. Many worlds had been taken back, and many others purged of corruption. The Imperium shored up. The time of the Great Armada was done. A change in strategy was called for. What happened at the Pit of Rokos in a few hours would dictate the strategy. So much had to fall into place for victory to be assured. Goldman revised plans, long in the making, thinking through counter-moves to multiple potential enemy actions. He found it hard to find time to deeply think when he was not in the chamber of reflection. There had been so many demands on his attention since he had been revived. This small cubic room, 4 meters by 4 meters by 4 meters, was the only place he might bring all his prodigious power to bear on a single issue. Today that issue was victory at Rokos. A metallic voice broke his concentration. "My lord, we are approaching 108, Beta Capsule 92. Goodman's eyes opened upon a plain space lit in a soothing blue light. The hideous Gothic extravagance that typified human art in this era was absent. He filled his lungs with blood-warm air, held his breath, then blew it out in a long, controlled exhalation, letting a bit of his tension go with it. He stood and rotated his neck, wincing at the awkward stretch of skin at his throat. The wound still hurt. Primarchs did not scar easily, but Fulcrum had left him a fine one. A thick rope of scar crossed his robe from one side to the other. Sadly of true, it sloped just enough for the raised end to catch annoyingly on his armor seals, no matter how many times he had them adjusted. "Give me an exact estimated time of arrival," asked Gulliman. There was a short wait while he panicked, while the pickled brains of dead men searched for the answers of the... "Give me an exact estimated time of arrival," asked Gulliman. There was a short wait while the pickled brains of dead men searched for the answers to the question. 4 hours, 36 minutes, 9 seconds, Primarch. "Inform Captain Felix and Sicarius that I'm rested. Tell the command deck to expect my presence shortly. Summon my arming servitors and masters of arms. I will go to them now." "As you wish, Primarch," said the voice. Goldman reached out. The meditation chamber was small enough for him to be able to touch the door's mechanism without taking a step. His fingers brushed a blank steel sheet. The embedded sensor recognized his unique energy signature, and the door swung open. Goldman stepped out of the room into his private chamber. A whole spire upon the MacGregor's honor was as it had been long time ago, for Goldman's quarters had been left practically untouched. The Gloriana-class battleship had been his flagship through the Crusade, at the beginning of the heresy. He had ordered to pursue the infamous Imperator, the flagship of his brother Lorgar. Guilliman had thought the MacGregor's honor lost in the pursuit, but it was not, the battleship finally limping home long after the Primarch had died. Upon its return, his quarters had been preserved, as Guilliman had left them. Gloriana-class battleship was designed for a legion of old, formation 100 times the size of a contemporary Space Marine chapter, 1,000 warriors. The official complement was hundreds of Adeptus Astartes, but it had been rare for so many to be aboard the MacGregor's honor at once, before Guilliman's return. Under the reborn Primarch, the Ultramarines flagship had again rung to the march of armored superhumans, and it had an ages past. But for the 10 millennia before the halls of the MacGregor's honor had been underused, there had been no need to employ the Primarch's old chambers. The Ultramarines ever were a practical breed, but sentimentally was in their makeup, and reverence added invisible locks to their father's quarters. Not one of the chapter masters that followed Guilliman had ever taken up residence here, though they had every right to, and the Primarch's palace had become a shrine. Beyond ceremonies commemorating the Primarch's life, the rooms had remained sealed. In the main, Guilliman's palace had been carefully maintained, but entropy warped its figures into the complex fabric nonetheless, dulling metal and rotting cloth. Even now, refitted and occupied for the century of indominus crusade, Robert Guilliman still caught the scent of neglect beneath the oily smell of ship air. He passed through the staterooms and down corridors whose doors opened on opulent guest chambers. This area was currently unoccupied, and he passed no one save for a scattering maintenance servitors. His household servants had little business on these levels when he had no guests, and Guilliman demanded solitude not to attend to his many duties. By a grand staircase and express lift, he made his way to his arming chambers. There were but a handful alive now who remembered the Great Heresy War. The teeming multitudes of the imperium had no inkling of the dream Horus' betrayal had killed. Few beings lived that would have noted the changes the avenging son of Ultramar had undergone. His patrician face was lined more with cares than with years, and sunken in itself untouched, especially around the cheeks. He was still handsome, if not beautiful, for all the Emperor's sons had been made to be perfect in thought and form. But though his features had a finesse a sculpture would struggle to capture, his was an eroded handsomeness, worn at the edges like a mountain's crags. His golden hair had thinned a little, and at the temples there were strands of grey. Pale brown circles gathered under his eyes when he grew tired, and there was a tightness in his jaw, a legacy of internal pain he had borne since his resurrection. Part of his discomfort, and it was constantly with him, was physical, an inabishable effect of Fulgrim's poisons. But there was also a sense of an absence in his gene-forged body that made itself known often as the dull ache. Colm called it emotional pain. After all he had seen in his age, he remained loath to name it spiritual in nature. He was too enamorous for a reason to truly believe his soul had been injured. In contrast with the upper levels, the lower decks of the place spire was full of activity. Human servants bustled to and fro. Servitors clumped by bearing heavy burdens. A pair of tech priests broke off their conversation and bowed as he strode past them. A man clad in variation of Ultramar's Presidial Guard uniform stood to attention as he approached his arming chamber doors. The doors hissed open and he passed within. Arming chamber did not justice to Guilliman's collection of weaponry. Part museum, part armory, it was a complex in its own right. The Grand Hall of Armament was its centerpiece, housing not only his personal war gear, but Xenos trophies and ancient designs of human weaponry. A huge window filled one wall. The central panels were taken up by a stained glass made of the old 500 Worlds of Ultramar, commissioned by the Primarchs at the ship's refit. A mezzanine crammed with more devices of war ran around the three sides of the room not occupied by the window. An honor guard of empty suits lined the central aisle, examples of every sort of power armor worn by the Ultramarines in their long history. There were 36 of them, all told with many variants of every mark, from lightweight scout armors to enormous prototype Terminator suits, constructed at the height of the Great Crusade. Colin passed through the last podiums, where stood numerous iterations of Belarius claws, new Mark 10 power armor, all designed for differing combat roles. Between them stood more men from the Percentile Guard's naval division, the energy pikes dipping in salute as he passed. From the Grand Hall of Armament, Guilliman went into his personal arming room. Serfs and servitors stood awaiting for him, a pair of tech priests at their head. The pieces of the armor of fate were nearly arrayed upon a malachite slab, covered with blue velvet. The suit was of Mark Major's design, like so much else, and superior to the armor of reason Gilman had worn in his previous life, which now resided in his reliquaries of MacGregor. The Victrix Guard were there to greet him. Captain Cato Sigarius led them. "My lord," said Sigarius. The Victrix Guard got down on the bended knee. "Rise," commanded the Primarch. He entered an outside arming frame and took off his robe. The man he handed it to was almost lost in its folds as he took it. Gilman already wore a dark grey body glove, its surface marked with the dull silver interactive circuits. It gathered in complicated whirls where the metal interface paused and suddenly stopped. His body poked through the glove. "You are ready, my lord?" asked the senior of the tech priest, his voice emanating from voxmeters embedded in his head. "Army," commanded the Primarch. Gilman had all his hands. At the orders of the Adeptus Mechanicus, the arming team began to assemble the armor around their lord. It was so massive that dedicated servitors equipped with industrial-grade augmentics were required to move each piece. The boots were brought forward in soft-gripped cargo pincers. They alone weighed hundreds of kilograms. "Captain Sicarius, report to me," said Gilman. Sicarius approached the arming cage with the easy swagger of a master swordsman. Captain of the Second Company, Master of Watch, and Grand Duke of Talazar, Knight Champion of MacGregor, and High Suzerain of Ultramar, his titles fitted his ego. As always, he rested his hands on the pommel of his sheathed broadsword. Gilman only recalled seeing Sicarius' right hand of the blade a couple of times. Despite his many honors, the captain had been headstrong. His stubbornness reminded Gilman little of Thiel, and the Primarch had spent considerable time forming Sicarius into something other than a merely exemplary warrior. "My lord," said Sicarius, "the enemy is gathering in strength around the third planet of the system. Elements of the World Bearers, Black Legion, Iron Warriors, and various renegade forces act in concert. They noted our presence as soon as we departed the Mandeville Point, but they have not moved to the planet to intercept. The World Bearers are the greatest contingent." "Good. There was an ancient grudge between the Ultramarines and the World Bearers. A chance to spill the blood of Lothgar is always welcome. Their presence is unsurprising. Only those fanatics would undertake the construction of something like this orbital. How is the enemy's disposition?" "They are fragmented, and lack our organization, my lord. They are enough to put up a credible defense. It depends. It always does with these heretics, whether they have a strong leader. If not, they will be easily dealt with." Gilman frowned as an interface spike burned itself in a neural socket. "We must be swift before their sorcerers bring forth demons to aid them. By our strategical calculations, the flotilla represents a significant proportion of the enemy's strength in this sector. It's their interpretation that this group has assembled to protect the orbital frame. If they gather here so that we may destroy them more easily, we should not complain." "I admire your optimism." Servants with power drivers for hands bolted Gilman's greaves to his legs, while the tech priest muttered benedictions of protection and smooth operation. "Order the New Dawn to turn about. Have four cruiser group of Order the New Dawn to turn about," said Gilman. "Have four cruiser groups break off from our formation to escort it. Captain Diamonus is to lead it in reinforcing our rearguard. The rearguard will still hold position 5 kilometers rearward. I want picket groups on regular sweeps around the edges of the system, and a full deep void Argus scans every 5 minutes looking for warp exit signatures. Check the Mandeville Point gravity pauses every area in the system where gravic interplay might allow an emergency ingress. The traitors are becoming desperate. We must be wary of reinforcements of traitors and demons." "As you command, Lord Gilman." "The system is critical, Sicarius. I will not lose it. Send word to Dominus Glavo that I want him and the higher tier command of his battle congregation, together with Prime Hermeticon Cornus Road, to attend upon the moment of the battle is over." He avoided the term tagmata. The military organization of the Adeptus Mechanicus had changed radically since the days of the old Mechanicum. "Together, make that absolutely clear. I will not entertain their petty rivalries no longer. The Dominus is to aid the Prime Hermeticon, or they will answer to me directly. Make that understood. We must work quickly once the third work is taken, with no dissension." "Yes, my lord." "Have there been any developments while I rested?" Sicarius smiled lightly. Gilman's attention to detail was exacting. He had been meditating for 32 minutes only. All relevant information has been inputted into your personal data feeds, my lord. There is nothing of note to report either from this in the system or in the area or elsewhere. The proximity to the pit of rockers makes estropathy problematic. Nothing relayed from the outer fleets or other matters? No, my lord. Then all is well. His armorers had clad him as far as his waist. The activity lessened the moment as diagnostic handsets were locked into his armor interface ports to check the function of the lower assembly. The legs tensed as their fiber bundles contracted. The handset chirped affirmatively and the armoring commences anew. Leave Maculus and Dibbus here, said Gulman, nodding at the two ultramarines. I wish to speak with them about their plans for redevelopment of the Verdrian system. The Vitrix Guard were as such statesmen as warriors, and a practice Gulman had been reintroduced to this chapter. Take the rest of the Vitrix Guard with you to the command deck. I will join you shortly. As you command, said Sicarius. And where's Felix? He's delayed, my lord. He sends his apologies. Very well, said Gulman. See, he is as with us the opening of the battle. Our will have representatives of all arms of the crusade present. This is an important day, Sicarius. The backplate of Gulman's armor was lowered into position by a crane, held steady by velvet-gloved hands of four mortal Selvins. Two massively augmented servitors moved the armor of Fate's breastplate from the table, moving into the perfect alignment with tiny whining of their servo motors. They slammed the breastplate home. Small clicks sounded as it locked to the backplate, and two men worked quickly to tighten the hex screws, making the seal fast. My lord, said Sicarius, with one last bow he departed, leaving two Victrix Guard behind. Praise the Omniscia for the armor of fate, broke in the tech priest. Praise the Emperor for his wisdom. Praise the motive force for the activation of the Primarch's shields. Gulman hit a wince at the tech priest fervor. He had little time for religion. At least they're not singing, Gulman thought. He had put a stop to that. Dibbus Marcellus, come over here, Gulman said to the two remaining members of the Vitrix Guard. He settled back into the arming frame as the rest of his arm was assembled around him. Tell me more about this water conservation regime you wish to impose on Cal's Street world. I understand you have been suffering disagreement. We will resolve this now, or we'll decry you as worse than the Archmagi. The two warriors glanced at each other and approached. They set out their plans, and where they did not accord, the Primarch listened. So the matter of peace were discussed as Gulman's armada sped towards the pit of Rokos and the enemy awaiting them there.